Hello and welcome to our special program, Colon Cancer and Genetics, Your Risk of Having Lynch Syndrome. March is Colon Cancer Awareness Month. Some colon cancers have been found to be hereditary. Lynch syndrome is the most common cause of hereditary colon cancer, accounting for up to 4% of all colon cancers, and that's about 2 out of every 50 cases. I have with me today a panel of experts who will shed more light on this important health issue. With me are Keith Warner. He's a cancer survivor and a volunteer for the American Cancer Society. Anna Leininger is a certified genetic counselor with Minnesota Oncology. Dr. Thomas Amatruda is a medical oncologist, hematologist, and director of cancer genetics at Minnesota Oncology. And Dr. Nora-Lane Lindor is a professor of medical genetics at Mayo Clinic and principal investigator of the Colon Cancer Family Registry. Welcome to you all. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I think a lot of folks watching out there are familiar with the term colon cancer, but I would bet most of the viewers today have never even heard of the term Lynch syndrome. Could you share with our viewers what Lynch syndrome is and how it relates specifically to colon cancer,
Thanks,
Doctor?
Karen. Well, thank you for the chance to talk and to bring people information about this important issue. I've been caring for cancer patients for about 25 years. And during that time, I think we've made great progress. Some cancers we can cure, many we can improve treatment on, we can detect some earlier. And the key thing that's happened is we've gotten to understand the molecular basis of certain of the cancers. By doing that, we can target therapies to treat cancers more effectively, understand how cancers start, and help people to avoid injury from this very dangerous disease. Mm-hmm. Colon cancer has been not a full success story, but we've made enormous progress.
Right.
Colonoscopies have become more available, safer, covered by insurance carriers, and through colonoscopies we can detect cancers almost before they start, when they're in polyps, and we can remove those polyps and cure them. We can detect them early. And by doing that, the incidence of this cancer has decreased greatly in the American population, and death from this cancer has declined as well. Mm-hmm. But we still need to do more. It is still, colon cancer is one of the leading causes of cancer deaths in this country and across the world. And one of the main areas we can improve on this is identifying people who are at exceptionally high risk of this, and then offering those people increased screening and specialized prevention. And the work that Anna and Dr. Lindor have done really are helping us to do that. And also, Keith will talk about his experience, and I think will detail this journey.
Sure, sure, okay. Well, you mentioned Keith, and Keith, you are a cancer survivor, colon cancer, along with 3 other types of cancer. When did you discover the link with Lynch syndrome? Tell us about your journey there.
Basically, I was first diagnosed when I was 34 years old in 1969 with colon cancer. And I went 25 years and I was re-diagnosed with colon cancer. And the information wasn't available as readily as it is today. Mm-hmm. And the significant thing, I was at Mayo Clinic and a doctor, he was going to operate on me for sarcoma on my chest. And he asked the question, have you ever given any thought to genetic study on colon cancer? My oldest sister died of colon cancer in 1969, 2 months after I was diagnosed with cancer. My mother had colon cancer back in the early 1950s, and she at that time survived. She lived till she was 86 years old. Wow. But it never registered with me, and I just wish I had that information back then that we have today, and I would want to alert everybody to really check into their family history, because Absolutely. It certainly comes out, and it'll come out in this conversation today.
Absolutely. And Anna, as a certified genetic counselor, can you explain to us what causes this Lynch syndrome?
All cancers are caused by a buildup of genetic damage over time. And among all of the 23,000 genes we have in our cells, there are whole teams of genes that work together to control the process of when do the cells of our body make more cells. Mm-hmm. As adults, that should happen to replenish. and to repair, and that's it. Cancer is caused when those genes become damaged and can't control the process. What can happen in some families is that you can inherit a faulty copy of one of those important genes.
Okay.
That, in essence, puts a head start down that road toward cancer.
Well, if you're aware that there's a strong kind of lineage of cancer running in your family, how does genetic counseling then help, or how does that help you with that?
It's a great question, and genetic counseling is often paired or equated with genetic testing. Genetic counseling is the process of, let's take a careful look at that family history and make a determination. How does that family history impact your risk? The family tree is the single most important tool for doing that. That's how we tell, is it hereditary?
Okay.
Second to that is we are now far enough along that in some cases we can use genetic testing to further clarify that risk. And we offer genetic testing when it can be used to prevent cancer, help better detect it early, or sometimes even guide treatment decisions.
Right, and before we started taping, you had a great analogy that you shared with us about just how time has changed. The analogy with the kind of horse and buggy to now. I mean, I think that really says a lot.
If a family has to have Lynch syndrome, this is the time to have it compared to
sure,
20
absolutely.
years ago.
Yeah.
The pace of genetic discovery is so rapid, and it makes me think of my grandmother, who was 97 when she died, but in her lifetime, literally, she saw the world go from horse and buggy to space shuttle.
Absolutely.
And, from the time Dr. Henry Lynch kind of first started observing cancer in families, which led to the discovery of Lynch syndrome, to now, it's that order of magnitude of change. But it makes me curious, where are we on that spectrum right now?
Because for a long time, as far as I understand, the medical community was focused on environmental causes. And Dr. Lynch really started to focus on, no, the genetics are really playing an important role here.
He did. The whole pendulum of science had kind of swung over to its cancer is environmental. And boy, Dr. Lynch says, but these families in Nebraska, they have too many cancers. And he stuck with his guns. And then with the rapid pace of genetic discovery, when we then had the tools to do molecular genetics and start discovering actual genes and learning what they do, he had laid the groundwork for that.
Which is good for the rest of us, for sure. Dr. Lindor, tell us a little bit about your work with the Family Registry, and is there more that we need to know about Lynch syndrome, or what have you discovered in that work?
Well, there's a lot more we need to know about this, and just for your general listenership here, I wanted to underscore that while all of the cancers are believed to be genetic at the root level, probably only a small % are hereditary.
Okay.
And
good to know.
There is a value in figuring out whether or not a given person has a hereditary form of colon cancer or a random event there, because it has very significant implications for their management, for their risk for future cancers, for their risk for their relatives, for the possibility of getting cancers beyond colon cancer. It's a huge piece of news when it is discovered in a family. We don't have all of the answers to everything about Lynch syndrome. We presently know that there are at least 4 different genes that could be involved in any given family. 1 gene per family, I should say. The genes are probably somewhat different. Generalities about Lynch syndrome, though, that make us key into this and make us think this is an important conversation to have, is that the cancers that occur in this syndrome tend to happen at a significantly younger age than in the general population. Keith mentioned his first cancer at age 34.
Yes.
I think we all would agree that that is significantly young for a colon cancer. In the general population, it's about 65.
Okay.
And the possibility of developing a second colon cancer is quite high, and so management is really influenced by trying to tease out which families do have Lynch syndrome amongst all individuals that have colon cancer.
Okay, very good. Anna, what do our doctors look for in our family history that would maybe trigger some genetic counseling?
The signs of hereditary risk are exactly what Dr. Luther and Keith have been telling us, which is early age of onset, more than one cancer in the same person, and then looking at how many cancers have occurred in the family. Is that more than we really ought to be expecting by chance? You know, if we had a table of 10 men and 10 women, and we were wondering, how many of these people are going to get colon cancer in the general population, we'd say, yeah, one of those people will get colon cancer. Might be at that table, might be at that table. If we had instead people with Lynch syndrome sitting at these tables, some of the data suggests that 7 people at each table, as high as 7 people at each table, will develop colorectal cancer if we don't prevent it by colonoscopy. And if you're sitting at the women's table, you've got a maybe 3, 4, 5 out of 10 chance of also having an endometrial cancer or an ovarian cancer. So it's exceedingly important to identify these risks because some of those can be prevented, and when we catch them early, they're curable.
Right. But if someone does have Lynch syndrome, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will have cancer, right?
That's a great question, and that's why it can appear to be skipping generations and families.
Okay.
Cancer is caused by a buildup of genetic problems over time. Lynch syndrome puts a big head start on that, but it doesn't tell you if, and it doesn't tell you when. It just changes the odds.
Okay.
It can tell you which table you're sitting at, but not which chair.
And for those of us who are still very unfamiliar with genetic counseling, what are some of the myths and misconceptions that you are hearing from people in general?
People's biggest fear is that based on a genetic test, you could lose your health insurance. 80% of us in this country believe that could happen. We've made great progress. Minnesota, Wisconsin, 30 other states have strong state laws, and we now have a federal law called the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. That's GINA.
Okay.
But one of the things that is of interest, often of interest to people, is the reason it took 13 years to get GINA passed was that no one could find any real-life examples of people having lost their health insurance because of a genetic test. So
well, there you go.
We have this incredible fear that this could happen, but at this point in time, it's apparently mostly unfounded.
Okay, very good. Dr. Amatruda, if you know that you have Lynch syndrome, how does that really influence then your treatment options or decisions?
Right. So we usually see people who have come into our office with cancer, and our job is to cure them as best as possible, to offer the best options for treatments, to make sure that we prevent other cancers, to make sure we help protect their families and prevent cancers. And over the years, I've been fortunate to work with a number of genetic counselors, and so it's turned my focus very much to addressing whether there's an inherited cause of cancer in the family. If so, can we define it? Can we use that information to guide treatment of the person in front of us? And can we use that information to help prevent cancer in that person and in their family? So in colon cancer, it immediately makes a difference. If somebody has Lynch syndrome, it changes their prognosis. They actually tend to do better. That the genetic changes in the Lynch syndrome seem to make the cancer more vulnerable to the body's own defenses. Not quite sure what. Maybe immune system works better against them. But people with Lynch syndrome who get colon cancer do better. And Keith's a testimony to this, I think. And also, they tend to react differently to chemotherapies. Some of the standard chemotherapies we'd use to try to prevent recurrence of colon cancer may not be the best choice in patients with Lynch syndrome. Instead, we may need to either use no chemotherapy if somebody has a very good prognosis, or a stronger chemotherapy that uses other agents as well. That's the immediate way in which Lynch syndrome guides us in treatment of colon cancer. I don't think there's as much evidence in other cancers which are associated with Lynch syndrome, such as ovarian cancer and endometrial cancer. But the other way it helps is we know to look for other cancers developing. If somebody has Lynch syndrome, they're at risk of getting a second colon cancer, at risk of stomach cancer, ovarian cancer, and endometrial cancer in a woman. And that can be overwhelming when you talk to somebody who's dealing with first a cancer diagnosis to say, well, not only do we have to worry about this cancer, we know you're at risk of other cancers. But by knowing it, we can screen for those cancers and catch them very early or even prevent them. And we also can tell people, are your children at risk or are they not at risk? If they're not at risk, we can give them reassurance through genetic testing. If they are at risk, we can develop plans to prevent cancer. Okay. For example, colonoscopy is usually done starting at 50 in the general population. But in a family with Lynch syndrome, that's too late. I can remember one family where we screened somebody at age 33 and detected a very early colon cancer that would have been 17 years before he actually was screened by standard population guidelines. So fortunately, oncologists and surgeons, gastroenterologists and primary care doctors all are becoming aware that family history means that you need a heightened degree of screening. And so that's a nice thing because it's awareness now in the general medical community. And by doing that, we're targeting some of these prevention and screening techniques to people who really are going to stand to benefit from them.
Okay. Which brings me to you, Keith. I mean, you've lived this journey. Are there things that you know now that would have maybe changed your treatment decisions, or what message would you want to relay to folks out there today?
Well, you know, it's a different time and a different place, and so it's hard for me to live life in a rearview mirror, so to speak, and look back. Obviously, we lost a daughter in 1998 who had non-functioning islet cell, and that could have been a hereditary Lynch syndrome. Had we known anything way in advance, she'd have been tested earlier. Our youngest daughter is 39, but at age 30, she started having colonoscopies and has had polyps every year, virtually. Okay. And so consequently, we know the results from that kind of proactive approach to the whole thing. 3 of our 5 children have Lynch syndrome, and they're all very proactive in their approach to this whole subject matter. And so consequently, it's preventative maintenance, you know, and the sooner you get there, the better the results are. And I definitely feel that what this whole group of people brings to the table is this awareness and fast reaction. And anybody listening out there, so often we say it's the person next door, it's not my family. And you got to take a good look. And Dr. Linder's got a chart over there of a family history that is significant, that people should not say, it isn't me. They need to ask the questions and get direct, because once you have it and you know about it, you can do something about it.
Well, let's talk about prevention. Dr. Amatruda, you know, what things can we do to prevent cancers if we have Lynch syndrome specifically? What are some things?
Well, the main way to prevent it is to remove it before it gets into a cancer. Dr. Linder can correct me on this, but colon cancers almost always start as a small polyp that develops into a larger polyp, or maybe into a polyp with some irregularity and into a cancer. And in most people, in the general population, that takes about 10 years. So that's why we can do colonoscopies every 10 years and be sure that we're preventing many cancers. Okay. In Lynch syndrome, the genetic changes that have occurred that cause the Lynch syndrome cause a rapid development of cancer. So you can go from a small polyp to a cancer in only about a year or a year and a half. So people need to be screened very often, a year and a half, maybe every year, every 1 to 2 years, depending on age. And they also need screening not just in the colon, but in the intestines. They need screening for blood in the urine, and screening potentially for other cancers. Women with Lynch syndrome are at risk of cancers of the womb and cancers of the ovaries. And they may actually benefit from surgery to remove those organs once they're aware of their risk and once they've finished having families. And by doing that, we can prevent the cancers. There also is some benefit occasionally to use of aspirin-like drugs, and maybe Dr. Linder can comment about that.
I was just going to ask you, is there a way to manage this risk more effectively?
Well, all of the cancer screening options that Dr. Amatruda has emphasized have become sort of standard of care for Lynch syndrome.
Okay.
Other lifestyle interventions have been looked at fairly extensively, though not as much in Lynch syndrome as in general colon cancer. And right now, good, healthy living lifestyle, of course, is always to be embraced. There is some evidence, however, that use of aspirin-like products probably does reduce the risk of Lynch-related cancers to a significant degree, but not enough that the screening can be avoided. This is the Colon Cancer Awareness Month here, and I kind of want to come back to the picture in front of me here, if I may. Anyone who has had colon cancer, I'd like to think that there's been some conversation in terms of why did I get this? And it's important to know that any one individual with colon cancer, you can't look at them and know that they have Lynch syndrome.
Right.
And I liken that to if you look at the stars in the sky, they all have names, but you really can't recognize them unless you see the constellation that they're part of.
The relationship.
And the family tree is your constellation.
Okay.
And the family tree that you probably can't see it, but you see it's big and there's lots of people on it. It's from Keith Warner's family tree here. There's a lot of people with cancers on it. And as Anna was saying, just the raw numbers of people who got cancers and the ages that they got them is a clue. It's the constellation that allows providers to be suspicious that there might be a Lynch syndrome or some underlying reason why this family is getting more than its share of cancer, and those individuals may benefit from a referral for further genetic evaluation.
Well, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Just one more sentence. For people who don't have much of a family or much of a family history, maybe they were adopted or out of touch, there are some laboratory techniques that can also do some advanced studies on the tumor that can help lead also to the diagnosis. So the family tree remains our most important and most available tool. But there are some other ways if people have had colon cancer at young ages or multiple tumors or have concerns.
What do you think this genetics research will have on the impact of cancer in the future? I mean, what are you seeing for the future?
Well, this is so underdiagnosed. I bet fewer than 10% of families with Lynch syndrome know they have it. And so simply identifying the families in our population that are at these high risks for very specific tumors and being able to offer to them the types of screening interventions, the extent of surgeries that are done is just so important.
Right, right.
You have to have the right diagnosis to give the right treatment and advice.
Well, and I can imagine it's so overwhelming when you get that diagnosis of cancer. It's tough to, really take in so much information. So getting this out to the public now is important. And Keith, when you went through you're still going through the cancer journey. I mean, what have you learned in terms of trying to prevent cancer? What are some things that you do now that really, besides the screening, is there anything else that you think people should know about?
I think consistently for me is the fact that I'm on a very strong routine visitation with my internist, and getting specifically blood tests for hemoglobin, because hemoglobin that was the unit of measure that made me become suspicious that I had colon cancer, and so consequently I know my hemoglobin very well and I stay on top of it. But I think that there are so many things behind it. I think consistent scheduling with colonoscopies and being on a first-name basis with your colon rectal specialist, because the fact there's nothing wrong. There's nothing there's nothing wrong with colonoscopies, and you should be proactive and take care of it and do it, and don't sit there and worry about it, because it's not that bad. I've had colonoscopies were discovered in 1972, and I've been having one virtually every year since then. So consequently, at one point, though, ironically, I was 19 months when I was discovered with that second one in 1994, and I had the doctor went to do the colonoscopy, and he says, when was your last one? I said, about 19 months ago. And he says, Keith, we won't find anything, but I'll go ahead and do this. And sure enough, there was a golf ball sized tumor
my goodness.
in 19 months.
Wow.
And so, and it wasn't missed. We went back and looked at the previous colonoscopy, and it wasn't missed. So consequently, you have to just stay ahead of it some way, shape, or form. And I do want to mention, you know, of the 3 children that we have, they're adults, of course, but we lost the one daughter, but our oldest daughter was 13 months between colonoscopies a year ago on St. Patrick's Day, and was found out that she had colon cancer.
Oh my goodness.
13 months.
Wow.
So you have to be proactive and stay ahead of it. But I would also say that adult men are very hesitant to listen and get medical advice. And I would just have to compliment my wife, because I almost, if I had a nosebleed, I was to the doctor's office. But she was there. She could sense it. She had a sixth sense. And we have to run to these things and take care of them and listen. And just don't say, oh, we'll do it. It's not gone with the wind. We'll talk about it tomorrow.
Absolutely.
We have to talk about it today. And that's why we're here doing this today, is because it's very important for people to have an awareness that they can be prevented. It's proactive. And some people fear finding out that you have cancer. And to me, you can't solve a problem until you identify and admit you have one. And
Absolutely.
so the only way to take it is to find out what the status is and then move forward and be proactive.
Absolutely. In the last couple of minutes that we have, any final thoughts or comments for our viewers, Doctor?
Yeah, the thought I have is the beauty of science in this, because you know, Dr. Linder and I have been working in this area for many years, and the story of how Lynch syndrome was diagnosed involved medical oncologists, geneticists, GI doctors, surgeons, basic scientists who studied bacterial genetics and yeast genetics, and that's how the genes were discovered, which then were found to be in the humans, epidemiologists and public health people. All this has come together to yield knowledge that's saving lives every day, decreasing the cost of healthcare to an enormous extent. And much of it came from basic science and from the language and collaboration of science. And you know, Dr. Linder is still leading this, and she's not mentioned that she is the author of a new syndrome like Lynch syndrome called Syndrome X, which is a Lynch syndrome without the same genetic changes as Lynch syndrome. And we don't yet know what causes that, do we? No. Unless you're going to tell us right now.
Final thoughts from you, Dr. Linder?
Talk to your doctor if you're concerned about your family history. Many times the patients have to prompt the conversations. They're ahead of the curve than the healthcare providers these days.
Don't
be shy about agitating on your own behalf.
Okay. Anna?
I'll back up one step from that, and I'll say know your family history. And the things that are important is who had cancer, how are they related to you, where in the body did it start, and how old were they when it happened. And a simple list is enough for a doctor or a genetic counselor or a geneticist to evaluate that for you.
Very good. Keith, final thought?
I just think people have fear of the unknown, but you can, if you've got facts, you can deal with it. And I think with that is the fact that if you know the risk, you can change the outcome. That's a significant part of the whole thing. For people to be, if they know the risk, they can change the outcome, because early detection is why I'm here.
Absolutely.
And I get to see grandchildren and things of that nature that I wouldn't have gotten to see.
And we get to see you here in our
well,
studio.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I'd like to thank you all for sharing this very valuable information on this important health topic, and continued success in your work on behalf of the rest of us who look to you all for your expertise. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And I'd like to thank our viewers for watching this special On Location TV19 production. For more information on today's topic, please visit the websites listed. And until next time, I'm Judy Skeie-Voss, wishing you good health.